I'm going to do the final part of the Three Flavours Cornetto Trilogy, directed by Edgar Wright and written by Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright, The World's End. So grab your 5 pints of beer, well, 4 pints and a tap water. And join me as we attempt the Golden Mile.
It's that man again. Despite his meandering maneuverability, his strategical susceptibility, his infantile indefatigability, and his tendency towards tactical stupidity, he still remains
an imaginary sound of music. An imaginary sound of music.
Are you sitting comfortably? Then we'll begin.
The film was released in 2013, and like I said, it was written by Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright and directed by Edgar Wright in the third film with a starring role of Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. It starts with a narration by the lead character Gary King, played by Simon Pegg, discussing the night that he left sixth form and how they attempted the legendary Golden Mile in the fictional town of Newton Haven. This consisted of drinking 12 pints on a mile around the town centre, having a pint in each pub to complete the Golden Mile. Gary's mentioning what happened on the night, the events in each pubs and along the way, who didn't make it and how they eventually didn't actually make it and ended up sat on top of the hill watching Newton Haven, realising that his life would never be as good as that, and it never did. Now at this point it seems that he's talking to ourselves, the audience, and then pans out to a support group that he's talking to. Like, it seems he's in a mental hospital, or he's not very well, and he's telling people his feelings. At this point as well, the character who played the zombie Mary is sat next to him as well. One of the characters asks him if he regrets not completing the Golden Mile, and he says no, but at this point he has an idea to try and get everyone back together to go back to Newton Haven and complete the Golden Mile. He goes and meets his fellow friends who, after some persuasion, agree to join him because Andy has decided to join. His best friend Andy is harder to persuade because of the accident that's not mentioned, but about him not drinking, and he's still angry about that. He goes to meet him. He lies that his mum died and looks to pay him £600 that he's owed him from years before, not realising that Gary's basically borrowed £200 off his 3 other friends to cover it. On the journey to Newton Haven, it seems quite obvious that Gary's never moved on from that night. He still dresses the same as he did, he's still got exactly the same car that he had 20 years ago, and he's still playing the same tapes that Stephen had made for him. And it's quite a sad bit actually that he's still playing the tape and how they've all moved on and don't really remember most of the things that the song brings back a memory, but Gary's still playing it every day. It's just quite sad to watch that bit. So when we get to Newton Haven, I'm going to mention the pubs in order, and then the significance of the pubs, and a little bit what happened around the night or in those pubs. So we'll start with the first one. One's quite self-explanatory, the first post. It's the first pub that they go into and have the first drink in there, where also he discovers that Andy's teetotal and he's going to intend on having 12 pints of tap water during the Golden Mile, and Gary's not really happy about that at all.
What?
Second pub, the Old Familiar. This is the pub where old man's sister Sam meets up with them, and Gary mentioned in the narrating at the beginning that on that night of the Golden Mile he met up with Old Man's sister, and they did have a rendezvous in the disabled toilets. Now see, it would seem that Sam is the old familiar at this point, and that's what the pub references, because he tries to follow her in the toilets again and she just rejects him, and then she leaves the pub. Very much to Stephen's annoyance, because once he sees Sam again he falls in love with her like he did 20 years before. The third pub is the Famous Cock. Now this is a little bit more easier to fathom, because they go in the pub and someone finally recognises Gary, but basically it's because he's barred for life from that pub for basically being a cock for 20 years before. So he is the famous cock in this scenario. Fourth pub, the Cross Hands. This one is slightly more, it can mean two things with this one. It's either, this is the point where they find out that Gary's mum actually isn't dead, and he made it up for them to just come on the pub crawl with them. It's where they decide to leave the pub and leave Gary, and it's where they discover the robots, where they all start fighting. Now, it's either the kind of fighting style the robots have, or how they all come together to fight the robots as one. So it could be either two things in this scenario. The Good Companions, this is to signify that they're all going to carry on the Golden Mile like they're just on a night out, pretending that they're five friends just having a fun night out. The next pub, the Trusty Servant, this has two meanings. It's where he bumps into the Reverend Green, who was played by Tyres from Space, who was in Shaun of the Dead also. Now, he realises that he's no longer a drug dealer, he works in an office, but he's actually working for the robots, who we don't know much about them at this point. He then receives a call that he's got to go to the office, and he looks absolutely terrified, so he believes he's going to, from watching the film, he's going to be replicated into a robot and disposed of. Also though, at this point, it's when Old Man goes to the toilet and comes back as a replicant, so it looks like he was captured in the toilets and turned into a robot at this point. The two-headed dog is quite harsh, if it is what I think it means, with the meeting Sam and with the twins, two heads the same, and they start fighting Gary.
Chuck us a ciggy.
If that's what I think it is, it's quite a harsh statement though. Also though, it could also mean about Gary being a dog as well, because he realised that Sam knew that he basically cheated on her with the twins as well. So it could signify that Gary is the two-headed dog, because he got with the twins and Sam as well.
No one else has a better idea, so fuck you.
The Mermaid, at this point the boys bump into the marmalade sandwich. Which could signify mermaids, which the old tales that they used to lead sailors away with the sirens, and would seduce sailors to come to the island, which they do in the film as well, with them looking exactly the same as they did 20 years ago, and Gary, Andy and Peter fall for them straight away. They're also on there's a blonde and two redheads on the mermaid sign as well for the pub. To the Beehive, this is the point where they meet the old professor, played by Pierce Brosnan, and he's trying to discuss what they're trying to do to make it, to all work together to make it a better place now, sort of like how a hive mind works in a beehive. So I think this signifies what this pub means. The King's Head, Gary is desperate to finish the Golden Mile. He's thinking about nothing at this point but the Golden Mile, not about the robots, nothing, just getting to the next pub. And I think it's mentioning about the King's Head is gone, and that's all he wants to do is finish the mile with his head's gone. Most King's Head pubs in England as well, it's King Charles I who was the last monarch to be beheaded. So I think it's just saying that signifies that as well. And all in all, this is an easy one. It's where Stephen crashes the beast into the air window to get them out. However, Gary's so intent on getting to the World's End that he runs out and he feels that he can't leave him and he needs to follow him. At this point, it looks like Stephen's about to get turned, but they draw the attention of the robots to them chasing to the World's End. So they finally get to the World's End and he's just about to drink the pint, and he starts fighting with Gary, telling him he's had enough. However, he says the Golden Mile is all he's got nothing else to live for, and Andy's got a perfect life, but he's telling them that his wife has left him and he's trying to get her back. At this point he discovers that Gary's very heavily bandaged on his arms, that he's attempted suicide. Gary fights him off and he pulls the pump to get a pint, and it lowers them down into a cellar, which is where all the replicants are, and they meet up with it's called the Network, which is just a light talking to them, which is voiced by Bill Nye. Try to persuade Gary to join them, but they can't persuade him. They're just arguing with them about Earth, about how their experiment isn't working because the amount of people they've had to replace. We're fed up with arguing with Gary at this point. The Network switches off and leaves Earth, which causes catastrophic effects around the world. All technology and communication goes down and gets destroyed, and they try their best to get out of Newton Haven. Sam comes back in a car and picks them up, and they avoid the blast radius, ending up on top of the hill like they did 20 years ago. Gary and Andy and Stephen watching Newton Haven burn. Gary tells Andy he's sorry at this point as well. The next thing we see is Andy sat around a post-apocalyptic style world telling his story of that night, which is a role reversal from the beginning when Gary was saying the story. It's now Andy telling the story. He tells about what happened to the rest of the boys, the replicant, Orman, and Peter.
I suppose he picked up where the other one left off. I'm not sure his wife noticed. Maybe she chose not to.
And how Stephen and Sam got together. And how Andy got back with his wife, but he doesn't know whatever happened to Gary. He doesn't know what become of him, but he just hopes he's happy wherever he is. The next scene is Gary walking the post-apocalyptic wasteland with the replicants of the boys as they were when they were all 18. The pub that they enter is called the Rising Sun, which would signify Gary being reborn. He's got a new life now, reliving his old adventures with his friends again. He doesn't seem to be drinking anymore. He asks the barman for 5 waters instead of beer, and he looks cleanly shaven and really well. And the film ends with Gary and the 4 boys attacking the people in the pub.
Me? They call me the king.
So the final film, the Cornetto Trilogy, sees the return of some familiar faces from previous films. Apart from obviously Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, we've got Bill Nye, who was in all 3, Martin Freeman, Julia Deakin as well. They all appeared in every single film. There's some Cornetto trilogy moments as well. The fence joke that is mentioned as well. You see Gary trying to jump a fence and not succeeding. Also the Bandit as well, that the sound of the music on the Bandit that appears in every single Cornetto Trilogy film. And also a Cornetto reference. Now, it's right at the end when Andy's mentioned that he doesn't even miss processed foods anymore, and a mint Cornetto wrapper hits the fence and blows away. So the three flavours Cornetto Trilogy, they had different meanings, with Shaun of the Dead being strawberry, which signified the blood and gore in it. Hot Fuzz being the classic Cornetto blue, which signified the boys in blue, the police. And the third one was mint Cornetto, which was the green colour of the classic colour of aliens. Personally, this is my favourite film of all three films. I think I connect with this film on a very personal level. Me moving from my hometown, far away. Because I'm from Sunderland originally, and I moved about 10 years ago. And every time I go up to Sunderland, it seems different. Like the town is different. I don't seem to recognise anyone when I go up as well, apart from family that is. But everyone else, I never recognise. I never see friends or people who I recognise. It all seems quite alien, and I think it really gets that really well in the film, about people moving away from their hometown and how they feel alienated when they come back. The story of Gary King as well, although funny at times, is a bit of a tragedy really. With his friends all moving on, having really successful careers, he's still living in that the next morning from that night 20 years ago. He's not moved on at all. That's how good Simon Pegg is. He can play that kind of person. Like with Shaun of the Dead, he was just a late 20-something, not sure what to do with his life, and Hot Fuzz playing like Nicholas Angel, like a hard stuck-up police officer who learns how to switch off. And then he can play someone like this as well and still add that comedy element. I think it's really good that he can do that. Nick Frost as well can do that as well, where he's Ed, really bumbling, and Danny Bottoman, and then he can play Andy Knightley as well. He can just turn it around. Another thing as well is that with Gary King, all his friends have names like the King's Court. There's Chamberlain, Page, Knightley, and Prince, which is a really nice little added in as well, that they're all members of Gary King's court. So for the final film of the trilogy, I'll give this a 10 out of 10. It's my favourite of all of them personally, and I just think it's really good how they do the character reversals, and there's a lot of characters in this film, so that's why I'd give it a 10.
Time, gentlemen!
So we've made it to the bitter end, or lager end. I hope you've enjoyed watching the videos. I've really had a lot of fun making them, and I've learnt a lot from the past couple of weeks of how to do things, so I really hope you've enjoyed it, and hopefully I'll improve more and more as time goes on and do better videos for you. I've got a lot more videos planned, so if you like what you see, why don't you subscribe, leave a comment, let me know what you think. I haven't got many comments right now, so I'll read everyone and get back to you and let you know what I think. But yeah, I just really appreciate you watching the videos. It really does help if you watch them. I've set myself a little target for 1,000 videos across my channel, and I'm about 18 off at the minute, so it would really help if you watched my videos as well. That'd be great. Okay, so that's it for me for now. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you in another video. And until then, hope you're well and stay safe.